but Tech and I, oh, he is.
He's here in spirit.
He's here in spirit. So he's here in spirit, but Tech and I will definitely try to fill that space. First, as you all can hear from the organizations they're a part of and what you've read in their bios, we don't really have to do that much work. So thank you for being so amazing and putting out some amazing political theory and ideas that'll make this go really fast and easy, but we'll get some depth. And then the idea and the focus of this panel is talk about what have been some of our hopes, some of our dreams, some of our challenges that we've faced while we've been trying to build the left, and particularly how to build a left organization. So could you all welcome me in joining our first two panelists? So it's going to be Tech, Reverend Sekou, and M. Adams.
Water to the stage. No, it's just some hip hop shit we sing. Reverend Sekou and M. Adams. I appreciate you guys being here, and I appreciate the audience for staying with us tonight through this incredibly difficult, nasty weather, which is probably the worst of our concerns in the world. It's the worst in the world. But I wanted to ask a question. Now that we have the two of you here, and please feel free to jump in for anything, what do you see on the ground that indicates the emerging and radical and transformative politics that we were talking about during the plenary in the beginning, during the panels? What has been your personal experiences with that?
Rock, paper, scissors. You cheating! Rock, paper, scissors, shoot.
You're cheating again.
Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. All right, you cheated. So I think a couple of things indicate that a movement is being built, and people are answering the call, I should say. So I think we have a couple of things. So I think we have the same group of people who've been organizing before, who are continuing to do movement building, political education, leadership development within communities, building out political platforms, really pushing out, I think, amazing things to bring our movement forward. And also, you have an entire group of people who were not organizing a couple years ago, a year ago, who are energized and propelled into action, and who want to be part of organizations and who want to actually build movements. So I think we see an expansion in base building, and if not fully an expansion of base building, certainly the possibility. I think we've always said, we need more people, we want more people, we need more people, and I think that call is being answered. And not only do we have more people, but we have a lot more people who are willing to do a lot more work, which certainly makes the movement building mechanisms possible. And then I also think we see a whole generation of thinkers emerge, putting out their own theory, their own analysis of how they understand the world, proposing radical solutions to address deep-rooted radical problems. So I think there are a lot of elements present for movement building. And certainly all the things that are happening internationally, right? So it's not only happening here in the States, but also work happening all over the country where we're in a really good time of complement in terms of social movements.
I see that a lot of times people's initial reaction to anything that has to do with the movement, they automatically assume it will be nothing but elderly people there. However, within the course, and we need that because we need obviously guidance and direction from the elders, but I've seen within the course of this reemergence of the movement now, because the movement never went away, and people always, movement's always been here, but there are so many more young people. What would either of you attribute that to? Is it just because it's in a young person's face that they can't accept that, the way any person here, if they were in their teenage years, would have been unable to, or is it a growing pain? I mean, from your experience in working closely with those children in Ferguson, or wherever you may find them being the victims of that sort of systemic brutality and the taking away of their civil rights, what has been the catalyst for moving the youth towards the movement in your experience?
Well,
I think a couple things. One, I mean, at one level, black people have always had a tenuous agreement with America, which is that we always know you're going to oppress us. It's just like, I don't care how right-wing you are, how radical you are. Some black parent, some black elder told you, baby, white folks are a little dangerous. And we have various solutions, right? You be twice as good and twice as smart just to get the opportunity to be told no. Right? W.B. Du Bois had a PhD from Harvard and couldn't teach there. So that's one. Some of us are going to lock our hair, change our names, become extremely Afrocentric, and return to a mythical African past that never existed, but it's like Sweet Home in Beloved. It's not better, it's just different. That's part of what our struggle is. But part of that tenuous agreement with America has been is that you won't disrespect us. So if you look at the slave rebellions, many of the slave insurrections happen after children who have died at the hands of masters. And that's what we saw in Ferguson. And so what has happened is that there has been a significant generation of petty bourgeois black leadership that has been preoccupied with access to material toys and positions without any systematic change, subjecting themselves to the neoliberal option in which individual ascension replaces community progress. And so for a younger generation of folks in which who have emerged for 8 years, they've had a black president, a black attorney general, black elected officials, black CEOs, black police chiefs, and the quality of their life has essentially gotten worse. And so when they left that baby in the street for 4.5 hours, they broke the agreement. And so young folks was like, fuck that. Right? So, you know, some of them hadn't read any Marx. They hadn't read any of them papers with the bad font that we like to pass out. And they said, fuck that. We're not going home. And so I think part of what has been that at one level, you can't get the level of youth resistance without the objective material conditions of a black face as the head of the American empire. Because they look at it and they say, oh, the emperor has no clothes. And so I think part of is that, and I think also what is unique about this moment is that this moment, and I said this earlier and I'm going to say it until the day I die, which is the day of the cisgendered black messiah leading us to the promised land are over. They're just over. Martin Luther King ain't coming back. Those days are over. But what you have, which is embodied in M and all the other young folk who are doing deep organizing around the country, is that you're going to, the new leadership is going to be queer, it's going to be woman-led, lots of single mothers in the street, it's going to be transnational. They got Black Lives Matter chapters in London, all over Africa, in Paris. It's going to be anti-imperialist. It's going to have a critique of capitalism. And so what we're seeing is the embodiment among young people, a generation of leadership that, in terms of my limited Christian analysis, they're incarnate. It's incarnational. It's embodied of a radically queer, anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist discourse, and they're doing so with limited resources. So you remember one of the things that we often talk about, you know, when we romanticize the civil rights movement, you know, everybody over 40, you know, say they marched with Dr. King. You know, and you meet everybody in this room, they was on the bridge in Selma. If y'all was all on the goddamn bridge, it would have collapsed. But part of the mythology that I feel like young people are coming up against, and I feel like my role has been to push back, is that nostalgia is a form of mourning because the present is unbearable and the future is unforeseeable. And so a lot of what young people are also struggling against with limited fiscal resources is a mythology in which everybody participated in the movement of the 60s, which tampers their possibilities because it's untrue. There was plenty of infighting. Plenty of folks who don't like it. Some of y'all ain't still talking to each other because of something happened in '63. And so part of it is that I feel like part of the challenge that we face as a left, and I'll shut up on this point, is that actually Ferguson, Madison, Baltimore are actually indictments of the left. Because the left has not placed a premium, just like the rest of America, on poor black people. And I know I ain't got no power, but I wish I could issue a fatwa that you can't pass out no papers, you can't ask nobody to come to your meeting until you done broke bread at a black funeral, because black people trust you enough that they want you standing next to them when they're putting their parents in the ground. That our obsession over lines, over lives, papers over people, has disempowered and hindered the possibility of building an effective left in America, because we have embodied the level of racism and respectability in our movement that can't handle kids with tattoos, sagging their pants, saying fuck the police. And until we resolve that contradiction, I don't think we build a significant left, and I don't think young people will respect us.
Okay, thank you very much, man. The Reverend brought up these subjects about race, gender, class struggles. Where do you see the intersectionality of all these things in terms of being a driving force towards bringing people from different lives together in the movement?
You know, that's one of those questions where it's like, well, how do you really answer that?
Right.
So where do I see intersectionality, or why does intersectionality matter? Okay, so a couple things. So one, I think, and this is not just my belief, right? There's bodies of work on this, and there's evidence in the way that people live lives and build movements, that we dealing with all of it is just the frank truth. If we are thinking about my life specifically, I'm dealing with race, class, is the leadership of people who are talked about as being intersectional or having intersectional lives, and putting all of that out of there, putting it all out there, and we're not settling, right? And I think that's why this moment is unique. We won't be bought off. We won't be convinced that, oh, if they just give us a couple houses in the projects, we're gonna settle down. We want everything. We want freedom, and our freedom includes all of that.
No plea bargains.
Yeah.
We're going to trial.
Yeah, we want everything. We want, and I think that's why I'm really excited about now in this moment, and myself and a group of folks who are coming with us, is we not taking no losses, and we're here to get everything. And that includes not only freedom, as been talked about historically for the black community, but it's one that's queer-centered, one that's women-led, one that accounts for the wide array of abilities, the one that accounts for folks who've been incarcerated or currently stuck in the system, homeless, and a whole host of other things, different nationality or immigration or refugee statuses. And so I think that that is the movement. That's it. So when you ask me, so this is one of the reasons why I love Black Lives Matter, and this particular thing gets underplayed, is it's about black people, but it's about all black people and all facets of black lives, identities, and issues that are related to that. And so what you'll see, and what I've witnessed is, whether or not people have been formally trained, is this, you'll see people using a human rights framework to explain the rights of black people and what they deserve, right? You'll hear them saying, we are given this, or we're taking this because we're human, and because we're human, we deserve all of this, all parts of our identity. We're fighting for our ability to walk safely down the street out of a nightclub and not be murdered by the police, and not to be assaulted based on our gender and sexuality. So to me, identity and intersectionality is at the root of all of this. It is just as present and just as necessary as a call for black liberation and a black politic. It is the living politic.
I just wanted to say that before we ask the next question, one of the most interesting moments in my to get a personal understanding. I told a story in the other panel about a time I experienced police brutality when I was about 11 or 12 years old, and I talked about how people who are activists in the movement, this was an ongoing theme, how people who are activists in the movement were not bred in a lab. You know what I mean? They were not sent to some camp far away to train for years until they became an activist. Most of them were people who were just living their regular lives, and they could not turn away from the injustice that they saw. The majority of the people in this room are here because when you turn on your television, or when you read your paper, or when you find your news, however it may be on the internet, you see a world that you want to change, that you want to help to become better. What was that moment for the two of you? It doesn't have to be an epiphany moment, but it could be a collective moment, or a time in your life, or a period in which you decided, this is my calling, this is who I am.
I mean, I think for me I was raised in a beautiful, loving black community. Right? That I was raised by my grandmother and her friends. Many of them couldn't write their names. There's a woman named Miss Roberta. Say, come, she had a snuff bucket. You Northerners don't know nothing about snuff buckets. And she said, come here and read to me, boy. I see you, Gabriel. Gabriel, everybody put your hands together for the guy who's keeping our time together. I'm gonna mess with you the whole time. Bring it. And so I was raised in a beautiful, loving black community that loved Jesus and loved justice. A grandmother who taught me to read at 4 years old. A community of semi-literate people who placed an emphasis on the life of the mind. And so I think that's part of it. The other part, in terms of how I arrived in Ferguson, I grew up in St. Louis, and so I'm kind of from there. But there was something about seeing non-professional organizers in the street. And so it's those images of kids with tattoos and sagging their pantses, and these young folk, I just call everybody baby. That her and Z and they and gender non-conforming and all, like they got a whole thing, but comprehension is not requisite for compassion. So you may not understand it. So I didn't honestly understand what was happening, and I still don't. But I knew that some young folks from a poor working class community, highly policed, experiencing these non-patriarchal masculine forms of violence through high levels of ticketing, high levels of surveillance by the police forces, alienated and demonized by the black church, with no resources, no nonprofit industrial complex, NAACP, Urban League, Al Sharpton ain't there. Just some poor kids who said, fuck you, I'm not going home. And as a religious creature, we tend to be reactionary and conservative. I'm a bit of a missionary to Christianity, trying to save it from itself. And that because of the radicality of these queer youth in the street, helped me to rediscover my own radical voice. It was, you know what I'm saying? It was like they opened up the space in a different way. And I was like, well, fuck this. I'm getting in the street. If they in the street, I gotta be in the street. And so for me, the way I frame it is I was born again in the streets of Ferguson. And I've seen the face of God. And God is queer. And God is angry. God is a single mother. God says, fuck the police. And so so what has happened for me is that they open up a space for me to kind of find my own radical voice in a different way, to the point that it forced me out of the pulpit. So I resigned from my congregation. All right. So I moved back to St. Louis, and I spent most of my day chasing behind young people. Baby, don't do that. Baby, this is how you do civil disobedience. That ain't nonviolent if you hit that. Baby, don't do that. But and even when they're wrong, I'll never say a word about them in public wrong. That they're wrong. I'll always defend them. Now I'm gonna cuss them out behind and when we get in the room. but they're our children. And I just want to say lastly for the white folks, particularly for the white left, right ideas don't lead to right behavior. Philosophy, Germany dominated European philosophy for 800 years, and then Hitler pops out. So right ideas. Until each one of the white folks in this room are morally impacted and cosmically shaken. When you see a black baby laying in the street and it hits you like it's your own child, that's the only time we're gonna win. We're only going to win when every time they shoot a black baby down in the street, you don't bring your paper, you bring your body. And you don't try to, because the people got everything they need. They don't need your revolutionary consciousness. They already got it. But if you show up in a way, in a church basement somewhere, with some everyday people, and you figure out how you can support them and stand with them, I'm telling you, you might be born again. And I'm not talking about connected to a holy other. That the only possibility for you for us to win is for you to fundamentally believe that you have as much to risk and at stake in our struggle as black people themselves. So that simply means show up and shut up.
What they said. So quickly, one, I grew up with the moral stronghold. So my grandmother, who was in church more than she was at home, really indoctrinated me with, I think, values of righteousness. Not that I won't just associate with one particular religion or another. So I grew up sort of knowing that it was wrong that people were living in the street, or that everybody was poor, or we could never have anything to eat. I've always had those values, and when I got older and began to read different things or learn different things, I was really able to put, a systems analysis, some leftist language, whatever, on top of that. That sort of, to me, made it very natural that I move into the organizing work. But really what did it, what really did it in my soul was, so at the beginning we played rock, paper, scissors. Well, if you black, if you queer, if you female assigned, if you poor, you're kind of gonna get killed by this country one way or another anyway. Think about it. Every health stat is against me, from diabetes to HIV. Every poverty, economic, whatever is against me, from housing to joblessness. Every stat is against me in terms of incarceration and freedom. Every stat is against me in terms of sexual violence and domestic violence being acted out or against me on my body. Just around the gamut. Everything around me says, if you black and you queer and you female, you all of this, we coming for you, right? This is what the state has in for me. And some of us, not all of us, but some of us did a little bit of rock, paper, scissors and said, if we go, we're gonna go fighting. So I'm in it because I'm trying to save my life. I don't have a choice. What other choice I got? Well, no, seriously, what other choice do I have? And so this is the only way I know to live, right? My grandmother, right? I'm telling you, I can feel her in me. If I don't get out here in these streets, I can't sleep at night, right? When it's probably more safe for you to try to run from the police than it is to stand here and talk. I gotta do something, right? And so I threw my rock, so to speak, at the cops a long time ago, and I've been in it ever since.
I just want to say that this is a topic that we had touched on previously, the idea of faith coexisting or being a catalyst or playing a role in somebody's revolutionary mentality. But the thing that we discussed about is saying that if, for example, you claim Jesus as your personal savior, or if you're Muslim or Jewish or Hindu or whatever faith that you have, it's not enough just to say that's what you are, right? I was saying this when we left. If I say I'm a martial artist and a child comes in here and one hitter quitters me, or if I say I'm a doctor and someone needs the Heimlich and I can't even do that for them, then I'm not really a doctor, and I'm not a jiu-jitsu master. But at the same time, if you're going to talk about Jesus, or if you're going to talk about revolution or revolutionary movements, then you have to walk in the steps of Jesus to be a Christian, which means you have to feed the poor. It's not about telling people they can't get married to someone because of one line in a book. It's about saying all the other things that exemplify the message I'm going to bring to you. I'll be out in the street with the prostitutes, the people that are so poor that they can't afford any other living, so they're so poor they're selling their bodies in a slum. I'm going to be with the people that are drug addicted, those people that have been left behind by the government, that are thrown in prison for having a disease. It's important that we realize that this conversation isn't just limited to the faith that we have in God that's supposed to separate us from our revolutionary politics. No, that is our faith. Those revolutionary politics and that utopia of freedom, that's our heaven. Getting there, that's our journey. And love is our God. I love y'all. Thank you very much.
It's the epicenter of policing suppression and counterinsurgency. And so young people are faced every day with the nation's largest school police department, and some of which they receive some weapons through the 1033 program, which basically were tanks, grenade launchers, everything that we saw in Ferguson were some of the things that we saw on the street. And for a lot of the black young people that we were working with, you know, a lot of their questions and the questioning is, our demands seem to be centered around reforming the very system that's causing the harm on us. So how do we have a broader conversation about a broader black plan? How do we fight against counterinsurgency? And understand that every weapon, every gun that we see inside of our schools or inside of our community is a signal to us that the system is going to work. It's a signal to my young people that you are not. I wanted you all to share with us about movement building and your left political experience. What were and are the nature of revolutionary organizations today? And to delve deep, I think we need to be honest and dig deep and talk about fragmentation and alienation within and between revolutionary organizations and organizing in your own experience. That was a lot, but
I'll start. Let's see. I think the clearest way to start with that question is to actually look to the past. Because I think that when we're talking about the fragmentation of the left today, or just even the smallness of the left today, I think that we have to look at that in the context of what happened to the left during the last black insurgency and during the last period of when there was a larger, significant left at the end of the 1960s and into the 1970s. And I think that there were a couple of things at play in terms of the concerted effort to destabilize the left. And in this case, I'll talk specifically about the black left. I think on the one hand, there was the unquestionable assault by the state to crush and obliterate black revolutionaries, and even the black radicalism from the destruction of Detroit and allowing Detroit to end up in the situation it is today, to the massacre of Black Panthers, to the incarceration of Black Panthers and other black radicals. I think that that was a clear, unquestionable aspect of the strategy of the state to not just undermine the left, but to really obliterate any notion that you should fight back, that you should resist, that you should have a different conception of what society and life should be like. And I think the other part of that, so we have oppression, the other part of that was co-optation, and the absorption of a layer of African Americans into the system to both demonstrate that American capitalism could work, could be successful, and to also shift the burden of governing black urban spaces at that time from white political machines to black political machines, with the hope that that would be able to help remove at least one of the antagonisms that was driving the black rebellions of the 1960s. And so I think in many ways the left is still recovering from this very concerted effort of destabilization in the 1960s, at the end of the 1960s and the 1970s. But I think that where the hope lies is that it's very difficult to talk about the rebuilding of the left outside of the context of the rebuilding of social movements in general. And so I think that we are in a situation now where for the first time in more than a generation, that there is an actual living, breathing social movement unfolding right in our midst right now. And that represents, to me at least, the best hope and possibility of the revitalization of the broad left, but also the revolutionary left as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great starting place. And I think for me, coming out of organizing around Occupy, although that wasn't actually the first organizing that I did, I actually first worked with a group of African American women as part of the anti-Iraq war movement, and later got involved in Occupy actually. I think that one of the key aspects to thinking about building a left or considering what a left might be or should be right now is something about how we look towards a shared kind of political horizon and what that means, a shared vision for our future. And I think that probably a lot of the fragmentation that we see is because there's not really coherence. And even as we speak about it, we have here, we're talking specifically right now about really Black Lives Matter, right? And the audience, as I look out, I see is mostly a white audience. And so we have to sort of grapple with, I think, what that means, and how is it that we do the work of unfolding and creating spaces in which a process can unfold, where we are able to come together and develop a shared vision. I think that when we think about organizing, one of the key moments definitely was Occupy, because we did do this really well, I think, in spite of a lot of the different problems, because we were very open, we invited everyone in, and of course that was problematic, and it allowed for opportunities for state repression to destroy a burgeoning movement. But I think that we learned a lot about what it would mean to organize, and that some of the work is not organizing per se. It's really about how we come together and understand how we relate to one another fundamentally. And so I think that in terms of a revolutionary movement developing, I think probably that's one of the starting places that we might want to look at for how we organize. In other words, creating spaces in which we can really come together and develop a shared politics, a shared social horizon in which we transform the way in which we relate to one another fundamentally.
I want to say one more thing about that, because I think that I agree with all that. And I would also add that we're talking about rebuilding the left, that we need what exists of the left to be a part of that process. And so I do think it's worth saying that it does, to me, that's an attempt to synthesize history and politics in such a way as to figure out how to move our struggles forward. And sometimes that history and politics doesn't just naturally arise out of the struggle itself, because if it did, we'd probably be a lot further along than we actually are today. And so to that end, I think, you think about the Black Panther Party at the end of the 1960s. I think it was 1968 or 1969. Black Panthers were selling Panther Speaks, their newspaper, 100,000 copies a week, right? And so what was that newspaper doing? It was actually very fundamental in reconnecting the movement at the time with its history and tradition in a way that in this country is so savagely ripped from us, right? That people have no idea what the history and tradition of our movement is, whether it's the Black movement, whether it's a more general left movement. People don't know about the struggles in the 1930s. People don't know about the struggles in the 1960s. And that knowledge, that information doesn't just come out of thin air. It comes from people like people in this room, like people who identify as part of the left and who have made it part of their job to reconnect with that history, to learn and understand that history, who have then a responsibility to not go transmit it in an artificial way, but to embed themselves in the existing movements, to become organically connected to them, not in a cheerleading way either, but as an organic expression of the movements that exist, that part of the effort is to reconnect our rich history and tradition of struggle in this country, aside from struggles that have gone on across the world, and to reconnect the new generation of revolutionaries and radicals who are just getting in the struggle now, or who are trying to figure out what that is, that we all have a role to play in that, and that can look like many different things in many different ways, but I think that it's important to recognize the importance of the left that exists right now, and how we build on it.
I think that Black freedom thought has been at the core of revolution and counter-revolution. And thinking about U.S. Jim Crow, apartheid, all of those things. How much do you think that in our society, or even in the movement today, that people are cognizant or thinking about that?
We're thinking about history?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure of the answer how much people. I think they are thinking about history. Although, I guess what I would say to that is the concern that I have is the way in which we analyze that history and don't sort of fetishize that history. Because particularly, I think, within African American communities, we may have a little bit of fetishization of the civil rights movement, to say the least, right? And I think that's it's challenging because that doesn't allow us to have intergenerational struggle very easily, because we have a generation of people who really pride themselves, of course, on the amazing work that they did at a particular time. However, I think for my generation and younger generations, we've seen less result from that. So on the one hand, I think that we really need to look to that history, but I think part of that analysis needs to be what has changed, how have the dynamics of power fundamentally changed, and so what are we actually up against and fighting for, and fighting towards, and looking towards, and imagining, envisioning for ourselves now. So on the one hand, I think that history, and anyone who knows any of the work that I do, it's always based in history, is very, very important. But on the other hand, I can sort of grow and are very flexible across borders. So I think that that's part of the thinking, that we need to create spaces in which we can do that together, not from a perspective of necessarily coming with a belief about how things were in the past or how things should be right now, or theoretical ideas, but more of a kind of collective grappling, and then some kind of decision making, some action, some kind of learning from that, and an unfolding process so that we can really sort of develop what that future, start to manifest, let's say, what that future might look like. One of the things that I think that we have seen, and Kiang and I were actually just talking about this before the panel, we had a really great conversation. And we laughed and said we wish we could be up there right now talking. But the ways in which current politics, particularly having a black president, and what an existential kind of breakthrough and possibility that was for people in spite of the results of that, right? And so it's a kind of twofold. It's not one thing, it's multiple things happening simultaneously where we're able through making an attempt, maybe that's a failed attempt, right? Where we see something beyond that horizon. And so I think a lot of the way in which this, the Black Lives Matter movement has come out has been about seeing some kind of glimmer beyond this political system, some kind of glimmer beyond capitalism, right?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add to that, because it's sort of what I was speaking to before, is the need to, is the need for people to understand what our history is, and to be reconnected with that history, particularly the history of radicalism and struggle. That so much work goes into disconnecting us from that history. So, I mean, that's one way to think about the schools crisis as well. It's not only, robbing our young people of a basic education, but when we think about what passes for history in this country, it underlines the point even more dramatically, I think. But I think that beyond history lessons and all that, which I think is important, I think that we also have to have a sense for what is different right now, and the new challenges that this political moment present to us in a way that I think, we're all still in the process of trying to figure out. But what does it mean to have this movement emerge in the context of the highest concentration of black political power in American history? How does that, how does that actually break from the tradition of the black freedom struggle, where historically African Americans across class lines have been pushed together in a common struggle for ideas about black freedom and black liberation? What does that mean now when you have a black mayor in Baltimore mobilizing the military to crush and put down a black rebellion? How does that change what we have historically thought about what the black freedom struggle represented? And so there's no history book we can look to solve that question. That's something that we have to figure out in the current in the current moment. So there has to be a balance of both knowing the traditions of our movement, but also we have to understand the contemporary dynamics, the effects of neoliberalism on our political movements, the effects of this kind of enshrinement of black political power on our movements. We have to be able to deal with those new questions as well.
Okay. So, in thinking about building the left, what do you think are some of the strengths and weaknesses of transformative political movements today?
Well, I think that the biggest, perhaps one of the largest problems that we have is this continued division between economic inequality and just, I'll stick with just this one, and racial inequality, and or more generally questions of oppression. And I think about that, I'll be controversial perhaps, but I think about that in the context of some of the left's enthusiasm for this Bernie Sanders run for president. And I'll raise it in this context and I understand that, and I'm sympathetic to that there's a candidate who is actually willing to talk about poor people as something more than a prop. But I think that when you think about the quickness with which sections of the left could be willing to jettison Justice for Palestine, which Bernie Sanders is committed to the state of Israel. Or if you think about Sanders' sort of lack of response, really, around Black Lives Matter. And I think the one interview he did on this question was to begin by speaking about how difficult it is to be a police officer in the United States. And so in the rush to embrace a candidacy that rightfully talks about the problems of economic inequality in this country, absolutely, but who has very little to say about the questions of racial oppression and has nothing to say about the issue of American imperialism, then that's a problem for the left, the inability to integrate those two things into a coherent picture of what is happening in the world today. We have to be able to talk about both race and class. We can't continue to separate issues of racial inequality from issues of economic inequality. And so I think in some ways if you look at the development of the political movements, the most significant political movements in the U.S. over the last 3 years, Occupy, which struggled to integrate issues of racial oppression. I think even though people were certainly trying, there were all sorts of efforts to do that, but had difficulty integrating an analysis of racial oppression into our understanding of economic inequality. I think that you've seen the Black Lives Matter movement begin to address some of that gap, because most of the activists and people who have been involved in the organizing have not confined themselves to the narrow issue of just police brutality. They've been able to connect issues of policing with issues of poverty and inequality in the neighborhoods where Black people are concentrated. And in some ways, that's the product of what King said was the importance, Martin Luther King said, was the importance of the Black movement itself, because it crystallizes more than any other struggle in the United States the contradictions of American capitalism, that the Black struggle shows more than anything the problems of racism, militarism, and commercialism in American society. And it's often why it's been the Black struggle, the Black movement, that is the pivot to social movements in general in this country. And I think that you can begin to see the makings of that with the Black Lives Matter movement, which has been able to highlight racial inequality and put it in a context of growing economic inequality in the U.S.
And I think that's such a critical point. And what's really interesting to me about the way in which Black Lives Matter has been translated through the media, right, has been that, of course, this economic piece is pulled right out. It's in other words, it's left out of the conversation, and it just has been reduced to, this is about the police, we can get rid of bad apples, let's put body cameras on them. I mean, these crazy ideas that none of the organizers, at least that I've heard speak, have ever really endorsed. And so I think part of this conflict and the difficulty in talking about both race and class at the same time is something that may come through in this conversation that African American people have been really vocal about ongoingly, which is about liberation, ultimately. And when we, I think, generally at various levels and various understandings, even via the sort of assimilation techniques that led to a Black president, right? Even via that, it's been about liberation from race itself. How do you get out of that situation of being racialized, of being dehumanized, and maybe is it by driving a BMW so all of these levels are there to this as well, but it's always somehow articulated through understandings and a deep just sensibility for liberation, right? And I think one of the interesting things is that when you mentioned Palestine, I work on a lot of Palestinian issues and am involved in them and care a lot, care very deeply about them. You always hear liberation articulated as part of the process for white Americans, right? And so it makes it very difficult because it may be that the understanding, the self-understanding, the identity doesn't feel necessarily like something that one would need or desire to be liberated from very naturally. But it's possible also that until we can articulate that sort of common aspect of liberation itself, right? And maybe those are liberation from different forms of racialization and understanding the ways in which this class conversation is a very racialized perspective. I think that we're going to not be able to sort of formulate something that's cohesive. And I'm not really sure about the idea of organizations coming together somehow on the ground and doing separate work on different campaigns, and then ever generating something that's really cohesive. I have a feeling that that's going to come from a human transformation of some sort, a transformation in the way that we understand our identities very fundamentally. And I'm not sure that we can really that we can do that without a struggle for liberation, and I wonder if that struggle also includes pretty much everyone in this room in various ways, and if we can look towards that perhaps together as a way that we might move forward.
Thank you. So we have a few minutes left, but we're having these broader conversations about theories and ideologies around the left, but let's ground it a little bit in a simple sentence, if you can. A simple one sentence, sentence with a lot of semicolons. Could you name, could you name what do you see as the national presence of the left, right? The national politics of the left, or national organization forms of the left? Is there anything that you can name as the on the ground of the left?
Did you say in more sense?
I said one sentence. And now it's going to be 3 words.
I'm going to put a few sentences together in a minute. I don't know if you can identify a single grouping, a single idea. I think that we're really at the very beginning of rebuilding the left in this country. And it's not to say that people haven't been doing this work for many, many, many years, but it's in a totally different context when we're looking at the development of the most important social movement in this country since the end of the last iteration of the Black freedom struggle. And that just changes everything. And so whatever people think that they were doing, over the last several years, which I think, has actually been important because it means that we're not reinventing the wheel, that we're not starting from scratch. But we have to raise our horizons, we have to think bigger. I think just really quick in terms of the previous question, one of the other big challenges is how do we get bigger? How do we actually build a much bigger, powerful, and significant left? And I think that means looking at it not as white people, need to look towards these movements in an altruistic way. White people need to do the rest of us, the favor of getting involved as if it's some kind of moral crusade. I think that we have to see how our fates are tied together. And that, yes, some of us are on the bottom and being tread to the ground, but it's within the context of the Bill Gates, it's within the context of these billionaires who are trying to destroy everyone's future in this country. And that if you're not part of the 1%. Things are not looking good for you in the United States. You know, and so the 99% moniker in some ways simplifies that process, but it's also true. And then we have to figure out on the basis, on what basis are we organizing unity? Do we fight for unity? It's certainly not on the basis of telling other people that their issues are unimportant and they need to wait until we deal with the meat and potatoes economic issues. It's certainly not that at all. We have to raise everyone's, we have to, you know, make everyone see that the fight against racism is central, the fight against sexism is central, the fight against, you know, homophobia, transphobia, gender oppression, all of that is central to our struggle, and that's how we're going to build the type of unity and unified movement we need to take on these billionaires who are literally trying to destroy the planet. And so that is the future, that's the future of our movement.
If you could go to one sentence, that'd be awesome.
I have problems with one sentence. I think it's a really challenging question. I'm not sure I could answer it exactly in one question, in one sentence. I think that there's no real way to define the current left, and that might be part of what we need to sort of struggle with right now. The left is many, many things, many different organizations working, different kinds of formations, collectives working, and I'm not sure that there's any one sentence or one coherent way to define the left right now.
All right, thank you. Can you all give it up for our panelists?